how are you? How are you feeling these days? If you're feeling a little bit stressed, most of us are, you've come to the right place because that's what we're going to talk about today. Every year, the American Psychological Association releases a report called Stress in America. It's always very interesting reading, but this year's report is a real blockbuster. So I'm going to take you through some of the findings. So without further ado, the top stressors of 2023. Here, I'm going to throw up the chart for you. The economy, the future of our nation, violence and crime, US debt, and then way down at 50%, climate change and global warming. So maybe you say shocking but not surprising, but to me this is blockbuster data, and I'll tell you why. It would be one thing if stress rates and levels were very, very low. If just, 20% of people were stressed out about the economy. 25% of people were stressed about the future of the nation. 10% of people were stressed out about social divisiveness. That's not the case, right? Those numbers are sky high. People, huge majorities of them, are feeling this way, stressed out about normal life stuff. The economy, society, the future. That's just normal life stuff, right? It shouldn't be stressful. 70% of people say that the economy, inflation, unemployment, money, is a significant source of stress. 70% of people say the future is a significant source of stress. This is not normal, and this is not good. This data begins to paint a portrait of a society that I would say is in profound distress. We should not be in a position where 70% of people say the economy is a significant source of stress, where the future of the country is a significant source of stress, where social divisiveness has become a significant source of stress. Let's dig into some of the data. We're going to put it in context, and then we're going to zoom out to the world and what it all means. Okay? So let me take you through some more of the findings that I think are really kind of shocking and disturbing. The situation for younger people. Gen Z adults and younger millennials are, quote unquote, completely overwhelmed by stress. 20 and 30-somethings in the United States are burdened by financial woes and isolation. Terrible stuff, but the more you dig into it, the more dire it gets. Here, let me throw up a quote for you. About 2/3 of 18 to 34-year-olds said stress makes it hard for them to focus, and it feels as though no one understands how stressed they are. That age group was also the most likely to say that most days their stress is completely overwhelming, 58%, that it renders them numb, 50%, and that most days they are so stressed they can't function. So think about that for a second. It's awful stuff, right? Young people, 58% of them, say most days their stress is completely overwhelming. That they're numb, 50%. That they can't function. That's devastating data, okay? Put it in context. Think about being young. Young people should be happy. They should be looking forward to the future. They should be, full of joy and sparkle and laughter. To see data like this tells us that something is going seriously, seriously wrong with a society. So we're going to come back to that. Let's keep digging into the data a little bit. The other thing that is really worth mentioning is not just that stress is so endemic, right? That we see 70% of people saying that, they have these significant stressors. It's also that stress levels have grown over time. So here, I'll throw up another quote for you. Compared with data from 2019, the percentage of Americans who are stressed out about the economy is up from 45%. Right? So it's undergone this huge explosion just in the last few years. So what we see is very, very high rates of stress. We see very, very high kind of valences of stress, distress, and we see that it's growing over time. Let's zoom out for a second now, okay? I'm going to throw up again here what I call the most important chart of the 21st century. So this chart shows us, this is global data, and it shows us happiness stagnating or falling and unhappiness exploding off the charts over the last 10 years. Anger, worry, despair, depression, anxiety, stress. So America's picture is a microcosm of this. What we're looking at is a major tectonic global shift and trend. This is an age of stress, of distress. I call it a eudaimonic crisis. Eudaimonia being the ancient Greek word for a life well lived. Okay? And we are in a great crisis of well-being in this day and age. Well-being in the simplest formulation is just happiness minus unhappiness, and our well-being is really, really suffering. And so the Stress in America report is part of this kind of global trend, and it's a real global trend. Now, what are we to do about it? Well, another very interesting set of findings in the report tells us the way that we're trying to deal with stress, and it's not working for us. So let me read you some quotes, okay? When it comes to stress management, many are struggling to cope and are bearing the burden alone. Around 3 in 5 adults said they don't talk about their stress overall because they don't want to burden others. And although finances are a top stressor, talking about them is off the table. Only about half of adults said they are comfortable talking with others about money and finances. More than 2 in 5 said they feel embarrassed talking about money. Around 3 in 5 adults said people around them just expect them to get over their stress. So, what does this paint a picture of? It paints a picture of a society whose attitudes towards dealing with this age of stress and trauma. Because remember, think about that global chart again. Remember the explosion? This is new for us. We're not used to feeling this way. To see this huge global explosion in rates of unhappiness and stress and anger and despair and whatever exploding, that's new. But the problem is we still have old norms around this stuff. We don't talk about it. That's what this report is telling us. Whether it's we don't want to burden others, or we feel humiliated or ashamed or guilty or embarrassed. Many reasons, but we don't talk about it. We keep it bottled up. So here we all are, feeling exactly the same way and not talking about it, bottling it up. Of course, bottling it up doesn't help the situation. It only makes it worse, right? It makes us more stressed in the end. So our attitudes and norms are from a different age, an age which was much more stress-free. And if you go into the report, I'll link it below, they'll talk about how, the world used to be a much less stressful place. And that's one of the big takeaways, right? That's maybe the big takeaway. The world used to be a much less stressful place. And now we are living in a world that is extremely stressful. That is why we see these sky-high rates of distress. And it's stress over things that shouldn't be stressful, right? In a modern functioning society, 70% of people shouldn't be stressed about the economy. 70% shouldn't be stressed about the future of the country. 50, 60% shouldn't be stressed out about social divisiveness. But they are. So our attitudes and norms aren't working because we're now in a different and much more stressful age, okay? And that shift is real. It's global. I showed you the global data. And it's real in another sense too, which is that people aren't feeling like this for no reason. It's not like we're all having a mass collective delusion and we're just stressing ourselves out for no reason. These things have become real problems, right? So 70% of people feeling stressed out about money is intimately related to the fact that 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck, right? 50, 60% stressed out about social divisiveness is intimately related to the fact that social capital, ties between people, bonds between people have undergone a catastrophic collapse over the last few decades. And we often talk about the loneliness epidemic or, isolation, friendship becoming a luxury. That's intimately related to social divisiveness becoming a significant source of stress. Think about the future. Why is that so stressful for people? Well, we seem to be adrift, right? Not just as countries, but as a civilization. We don't know how we're going to solve our big problems, and our leaders seem to be kind of like out to lunch about it, and who knows where the ship is going. It's kind of steaming straight ahead at the nearest iceberg. So people are stressed out. We live in this age of explosive stress because these problems have become real problems, okay? And we add another set of problems, which is that our attitudes and norms to dealing with this stuff aren't working. They keep us isolated in little bubbles of stress. And it's interesting if you think about it, right? We often talk about how divided we are and how everybody's so, at each other's throats or what have you. But what this data says is that actually we're the same in one deeply key and significantly human way, which is that we're all feeling like this. We may have political differences or believe different things about the economy, or doesn't matter, right? We may have differences in beliefs, but at the end of the day, we are all feeling very similarly stressed about exactly the same set of issues. Don't you think that's remarkable? I do, right? Because for all of the talk of us being so divided and bitterly, at each other's throats, in fact, there's a deeper commonality at play here. And so, like I said, these issues are very real. They're making us very stressed out. Our personal attitudes to dealing with them, don't talk about it, isn't working. The last thing I'll say is that our institutional approaches to dealing with them aren't working. So what do I mean by that? Well, we don't have institutions that seem to recognize any of this as a problem, but it is a problem. When significant majorities of people are feeling this way, that's a problem. But a deeper problem and an additional problem is when our institutions don't acknowledge that as one. And they ignore it. And that's kind of what they're doing, right? So they're looking at people and they're saying, hey, man, everything seems to be fine, right? You hear that from politicians and business leaders, it doesn't matter. Nobody seems to be acknowledging the elephant in the room, which is that people are battered and bruised these days, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, spiritually. People are hanging in there by a thread. It's a real problem, right? And we'll discuss in future videos how data like this, eudaimonic data about stress or unhappiness, goes on to predict social destabilization or economic destabilization or further pulling apart. So this isn't just data that exists in a vacuum. It's not moral data. It's not, hey, people are feeling stressed and you should feel bad for them. It's not about that. It's about society and civilization and where we're going and where we're heading. Because if everybody's stressed out, what kind of future can we create together, right? Go back to the data about millennials, right? That terrible finding. Gen Z adults and younger millennials are completely overwhelmed by stress, right? The majority are saying things like, hey, I can't function anymore. I can barely make it through the day. What kind of future are we going to have if young people, who are the future in that sense, right? They carry the potential of a civilization and a society with them in them. If they are unable to function, doesn't that mean that the future doesn't get created, right? So you see how big the issue gets. It's a very deep and very profound issue. I think it's one of the greatest issues of the 21st century. So that's a lot. I hope I didn't make you cry. I hope I didn't make your head explode. I thought that I would share all that with you because I think it's a very interesting and serious and blockbuster report, research, data, set of findings. I'll link it for you below. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you. I'll be back with you soon.